All right, I think we're going. So this is St. X Bass Team meeting. This is March, what is this, March 4th? That sound right? March 4th, 2021. We've had a lot of rain in Kentucky these last week or so, really. A ton of rain. The lakes are really going up hard. We've had a lot of flooding in certain places. The Green River Basin, the Kentucky River Basin, super high and flooded right now. Moderate to major flood stage, right up against major flood stage. A lot of the lakes have gone up 15 to 20 feet in the last week. We were last at Cumberland a few days ago, and it was, it wasn't bad. It was coming up a little bit. It had been coming up steadily for the last few weeks, but it was about 707 on the gauge. Now it's at about 727, so it's come up almost exactly 20 feet. And a lot of that motion happened on Sunday and Monday, and then a steady rise ever since then, still kind of rising and now sort of stabilizing. Today is Thursday, so we're going out this coming weekend to Nolin. We're studying up on that a little bit. We're talking about what's going on, and most likely we're going to be dealing with some off-colored water this week, some muddy water to stained to possibly muddy water, depending on where we are. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Some techniques to do with stained and muddy water, and especially in this cool water period as we're heading into the early spring, the early pre-spawn fish are starting to think about moving shallow. I had a guy in my class earlier today. He's a pond fisherman who caught a really, really nice bass recently in a pond, very shallow, like it's moving up. As soon as the ice got off, I mean, it was like up against the bank. So the fish want to move up right now. They're definitely in that mood. We saw water temperatures last week at Cumberland anywhere between 44 and 48, which was decently higher than I thought it would be, considering there was skin ice on the lake maybe a week before that. So we've had some nice warm days. We've had some fairly mild nights overall in the last couple of weeks, and the water temperature is really starting to respond to that and come up. So 50 degrees is that magic number a lot of people are looking for as far as the fish really starting to push a little shallower. But even, you've probably all seen ice fishing videos where people are drilling holes in 6 foot deep water and catching them through the ice. So they're not necessarily always super deep at these times. So we're going to talk particularly about some more shallow water techniques today. Even though it is early March, definitely shallow water starting to come into play. And some of these baits that I'm going to show you are definitely going to be shallow-oriented baits. So we talked a few minutes ago, we'll reiterate now, if you're an animal and you suddenly can't see very well, your instinct is to get up against something hard. Get up against in the case of a fish, get up against some cover, up against a log, up against some rocks, a boat dock, some kind of physical cover that you can feel secure against and be know where you are, kind of have a sense of orientation near that structure. So that's going to be important to think about. Fishing cover, fishing things that are objects. They're not going to roam around as much in open water and muddy water as they would in clear water. In clear water, they can see a lot better. They're roaming. They're chasing schools of fish. Everything's kind of spreading out. Muddy water, they tend to go to the bank a little bit more. They tend to get up shallow a little more against the cover, and it actually can make it a little easier to catch them when it's like that. When they're roaming, and sometimes it's hard to find them. You have to just happen upon them, but you can go target individual pieces of structure and cover when it's muddy. So let's talk about some techniques, some baits that are going to be key for that particular job. One bait that I always like in muddy water that has basically the concept is you're thinking of darker colors, you're thinking of something that has some thump to it and some flash to it. You want to displace some water, you want to give some vibration so that the fish can feel it with their lateral line, and they won't necessarily have to see it to go after it. They can kind of feel it coming, and have some sensation of that to go over to it. So baits that are a little bigger can be good because they're like, displacing water. They're kind of giving the fish an opportunity maybe not to have to chase down a bunch of little meals, but like one big meal, and then they're going to be okay for a while until maybe the conditions improve. So bigger baits can be good, something with some flash and thump. So here's a spinnerbait, always a good choice. This is a fairly big spinnerbait considering the kind of baits that I tend to throw. This is it's got pretty big blades as well, and you'll notice that it's got a big gold blade. This is I picked this one on purpose with the big gold blade, and it's got the chartreuse and white color, which is also good in pretty dingy water. It shows up nice and well. The gold shows up well on cloudy days and also shows up in muddy water better. If it was clear water and sunny, I would tend to pick more silver blade. that would tend to work a little better, in my experience. The gold blade is going to work well in muddy. This nice big blade is going to give a good bit of thump. They're going to feel it coming, and it'll also allow me to work this bait fairly slowly. Really, this time of year is not traditionally a great spinnerbait time of year. It's tend to be a little bit too cold for a spinnerbait, but this bait, you can run this bait pretty slowly with this big blade. You can slow roll it along, and they can certainly chase this down in this cold water. So don't just automatically think, oh, it's not spinnerbait time yet because it's still early March. That certainly can be a player already. So that can be a good one. Nice big gold blade spinnerbait. A lot of times people will throw a Colorado blade, which is a more rounded looking blade, even more thump and even more drag to it. So you can fish it a little more slowly, and it displaces a little more water with that big blade kicking around. But I tend to often be a fan of a willow leaf blade, which this is a big willow leaf blade, or an Indiana blade, which is kind of a hybrid blade. It's kind of a more rounded blade than this, but not quite as big. I fish the Indiana blade a lot in the more finesse version of the War Eagle spinnerbait. I love to throw those a lot at Taylorsville and other places that the water's a little more dingy. So I've caught them before at Cumberland and places like that on spinnerbait, but it has to be off-color water. I haven't ever really caught them in real clear water at Cumberland, but often in these spring times when the water gets a little dingy, and some really good fish have been caught on spinnerbait around shallow cover. Another one that can be awesome that a bunch of y'all know about, especially if you're in more open water that's away from snags or even potentially weedy lakes, people like a chatterbait. I'm not real experienced with a chatterbait. I tend to fish a spinnerbait more than a chatterbait, but I know they can be really killer, especially in ponds and more open water places around, not necessarily places where you're going to get snagged a lot, because you can see there's no weed guard on this compared to the spinnerbait. It tends to be a lot more weedless. It will deflect some with the way way it's set up. It'll kind of come up and over some things, but it tends to be a bit snaggy. Yeah, I think they probably do have some with them weed guards now. This is the original chatterbait, Z-Man original chatterbait. So that's a pretty good one there. Again, it's chartreuse and white. It's pretty good color. Chatterbait has a lot of thump to it as it's coming through the water. It's got a lot of vibration, and it displaces water pretty well. So it can be a good off-color bait. And you can see I have a little paddle tail swim bait on the back. I think that's I think what the brand of that particular one is. I can't recall off the top of my head, but that's a boot tail swim bait. There are a couple of different ones that I have fished on these before, and that gives a little more. You can fish it a little more slowly because it's got a little more drag to it, and it's got a little bit more water displacement and thump, so they can kind of track it along in the water. So that can be a good idea. I would also suggest possibly a darker colored one too, like you see sometimes like a black one or some other really dark color in real muddy water, or also at night if you're fishing at night. Like a black one can be really good. A lot of the concepts that could be thought of in night fishing could be thought of also in real muddy water, because it's the same concept. You're trying to displace water, get a little bit of thump going, and also have colors that show up in darkness better. So dark colors, blacks and purples and blues and those kind of things can be good. Speaking of dark colors, here's the infamous black and blue jig, and I have a trailer on here that's black with red flake. Blue flake would work as well. Any kind of red or blue kind of thing would be good. This is a pretty nice little jig. It's not too big. I could tend to throw pretty bigger jigs when it's really muddy too. That same kind of concept of displacing water and trying to give a little more thump. You can have a trailer with a little more action. This one has kind of little ribbon tail sort of spinners on it, and this one does give a little bit of a vibration, but there's certainly other trailers that would give more thump than this, and that might be a good idea in real muddy water. So the general concept tends to be when you're fishing really cold water to have less appendages and less thump on your jig trailers, just because there's not a lot really moving fast, zipping around in that cold water. We're approaching the time though when the water's warming up enough where a little bit more action is not necessarily a bad thing. So I think I will have this bait tied on Sunday. We'll pitch this around some shallow cover. It's got a nice weed guard on it that'll keep it from getting snagged on a lot of things. We'll be pitching this around wood and docks and rocks and any kind of thing that's looks like it's going to be good hard structure they might be orienting around. I may also swim it a little bit too, depending on how clear the water is, like fishing almost more like a spinnerbait and kind of just slow roll it around, just kind of, get it coming more vertically at me or horizontally at me instead of just necessarily dropping and bump along the bottom. I might actually get it swimming and getting these tails kicking, and that can be a really good technique as well. Any kind of creature bait. Here's a, what's the name of this thing? A pit boss. This is a pit boss. These have pretty extreme flappers on them. These outside flappers, this one looks like it's gotten bent, so it may not work. But the outside flappers, when they're in good condition, they really like kick wildly. And you get them coming through the water. They make a lot of commotion. They're a pretty big profile bait, so they're going to displace some water when they're swimming along. This can be a great thing to Texas rig, flip around, shallow cover. Yeah, it's a Berkeley pit boss, is what it's called. And these are decent. These work. We got onto these a few years ago at Kentucky Lake. They are really pretty good Kentucky Lake bait. I have yet to catch one at Taylorsville on this bait. I've thrown these at Taylorsville a lot, and I've yet to get a single bite at Taylorsville. And I couldn't tell you why. They work pretty darn well at Kentucky Lake, and I can't seem to get them to work at all at T-Ville. I don't understand it. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But T-Ville, I fish a lot of smaller baits, and that tends to work for me better. Like more, even though I'm catching similar sized fish, like for whatever reason, T-Ville, the smaller profiles work pretty well. This is another kind of craw bait, jig trailer or Texas rig kind of scenario. This is a yum bait. What's this one called? The Christie craw. After Jason Christie, I guess he's helped design this one. But this one has pretty good floppers on it. If you were to swim this or put this on the back of a swim jig or swimming it behind the jig, it would definitely displace some water and have some kick to it. And this is another black and blue, black with blue flake kind of color, which would be very good in muddy water. And then we get into some more minnow bait oriented things, as the chatterbait and the spinnerbait were. This is something I had rigged up from last week. I was planning on throwing this a good bit at green. This is a good old swim bait, and this is a pretty big one. I think this is a 5-inch. And there again, a nice big boot tail. I could swim this fairly slowly with that bigger boot tail, and I could, definitely thump some water with this, and it would be a little more subtle offering than a spinnerbait or something like that. If the water wasn't too muddy, I might go with this. I don't think I'd throw this in chocolate milk necessarily, but if it was a bit stained and have some color to it, this is something they certainly could track, especially in the bigger size like that. And that's something I'll also throw in a little clear water too. That's just a good all around thing to throw a lot of these lakes. While we're talking about swimming things or more horizontal presentations, here's a good offering. Some untangled here. So this kind of color is more chartreusey, kind of more loud color. This can show up pretty well in muddy water. This is a square bill. It's a pretty big square bill. This would displace some water and have a wide wobble to it as it was coming through the water, and you could fish this fairly slowly, and it would definitely displace some water and have a kick to it, and they could track it pretty well, and it would come through cover pretty well. Square bills are decently good. They're a bit snaggy, but they're not as snaggy as some things you could throw. So, people often talk about these as being something you can kind of grind through some wood and rocks and things and work your way through without too much trouble hanging up. Let's see. The red colors are always good, pretty much regardless of water clarity, but this red sort of square bill like this might be a really good option for muddy water or just cold water in general, which we'll have both of this week. So it's kind of hitting both of those things. People say it looks like a crawfish. I don't know if they think it looks like a crawfish. I'm not sure what they think. Yeah, I don't know what they think it looks like, but they will eat it in cold, muddy water and just cold water in general. That sort of thing, when they're first starting to move up, this square bill is only going to dive probably, 2 or 3 feet, you think? Something like that, depending on the line size you have it on, that kind of thing. It's a fairly shallow deal, but if you're around these newly flooded cover and some of the stuff that's up shallow, that might not be a bad idea. Something like that. Let's see what else we have here. Here's a DT6, I believe it is. DT6, another sort of brownish Rapala there. That's another good option. That's going to dive a little deeper than the square bill, but not terribly deep. You can go around some shallower rocks and that kind of thing, maybe pea gravel or chunk rock banks. This doesn't have any kind of rattle in it. It's pretty subtle. It's balsa wood. Very good color. This has got a little bit of a rattle in it. This is like a little square, but looks like a bluegill. That could be good. It's another sort of darker color. It's got a little bit of a thumping rattle in there. I don't know if this one did. Let's shake this one and see if it did. Yeah, this one had a little bit of a rattle as well. So something with a little bit of a rattle in it, and a little sound could be good in muddy water. This one did too. This little bomber square bill, that chartreuse and brown. That's a nice color in muddy water. They can track that pretty well. Yeah, nice, more small bait. That one's really almost one I'm going to have to throw on a spinning rod. That one's going to be pretty hard to throw, and especially if it's windy at all on a bait caster. But they will eat it. This one doesn't have much of a rattle to it. This is a pretty quiet little square bill, this one, so that could still be okay though. Let's see. So those are some of the main ones. Let's open it up to the guys in the room here. What are some things that you guys feel confident in when it's a little bit more muddy or stained water, especially colder water, getting into this early spring? Yeah, that's some of the main stuff. That's the kind of good thing about it when it's a little bit muddier. Like there's not that as many options. Like when it's clear, like last weekend at Cumberland, I had like 10 rods on the deck and I had all sorts of things, and I was like spinning out a little bit trying to throw all the different things. But you know, it's when it gets muddy, it kind of simplifies the game a little bit, and you're going for more high percentage places that really look just, you know, visual stuff that you can see, and you're pitching a cover, and you're fishing stuff that you think will hold a fish, and it's close enough to deeper water where they're going to be able to move up and be there after just a few days of it coming up. A lot of times the tricky thing as fishermen is maybe if we haven't been to a lake in a while, especially, and maybe we usually fish it at summer pool, and we show up to a place and we're like, oh, this spot's good around here. This is like a good spring spot or whatever. And you might think of it that way if the water had been up for, say, a month, but if it's only been up for 5 days, they might not be there yet. You know, you might be fishing ahead of the migration of the fish, kind of wanting to be further back. So that's the temptation that we can often fall prey to, is the idea of getting ahead of the fish, you know, wanting them to be shallower than they are, or wanting them to be further along in the process of coming in and getting ready for the spawn than they are. We are definitely in the pre-spawn at this point. I mean, the fish are definitely wanting to move, and they're definitely, you know, by March, we're about a month out from probably the real proper spawn happening. Yeah. We started seeing, and we had a question in the room here about last week at Cumberland. We saw some fish out real deep, and we're not sure what they were. We tried to catch them on Demiki rig and some jigging spoons and stuff. Yeah, we had to be out off of kind of more main big points, and like out over, say, 80 feet of water. We started graphing them on the big drop-offs, you know, where it really started dropping off into deep water. And then we right at the end, we found a place that was a good rocky point on the main lake, and we started graphing them in about 20 feet of water. Did you? Yeah, we were probably decently close to you then. You were a little further down maybe than we were towards you. Were you towards Beaver a little bit more? We were not quite that far down. We were between Indian and Beaver in some of those creeks over there. But we saw some activity. We saw quite a big school of fish off this one rocky point over there, and we were just starting to just try to figure them out. We think we had a couple bites on, jigging some stuff around them, and then the storm blew up and we got run off. So if we'd had another hour to work on them, we might have gotten something going on in there that we didn't quite. So, but there was a good learning experience last week at Cumberland. I'm really glad we went, and it's always good to see, you know, like there again, if the water's come up 20 feet, all that stuff we were seeing on the banks now underwater. So it's all in play, all those little crevices and coves and caves and under, you know, shelves of rock and all that stuff. So that's good to note where we were seeing some of that good stuff, and because now it's all underwater and we can remember where it is, and the fish are definitely going to use it as habitat. So yeah. So what are some other things that you guys think of that could be good in muddy water, for the sake of our other guys here who might watch this video? Anybody on the meet want to contribute any comments here? Feel free to unmute and jump in.
Feel like you pretty well nailed it.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I thought I pretty well nailed it for last week too, and it didn't really pan out for us, did it? But hey, every week you gotta get out there and give it a whirl. So yeah, this is the tricky thing about this time of year. I will say this too. It's a big transitional time, right? You're going from true winter pattern to like heading into the spawn. It's a transitional period, and I've had some mighty struggles in March before. It's not a period of time where you can always just get out there and wreck them. It's hit or miss. Like there's some days that are amazing, and there's some days that are not amazing. And there's some days that it's scattered. But I've had quite a lot of either really amazing days or really bad days in March. It can really go, and the weather is very changeable. Obviously, extremes of weather are pretty normal around Kentucky in March. It's a really turbulent time of year, and the fish are trying to figure out what they're doing. The fishermen are trying to figure out what they're doing. And, it's a challenging time, but it's definitely a time that the more you get out there this time of year, you can put the pieces together a little bit and start figuring out what's going on, and really trying to stay with the fish. Stay with the progression of the spring as we go along, as we get going with the migration. They're wanting to go shallow. We know that. Like they've been a bit deeper now. They're wanting to go shallow. So it's a matter of trying to find those transitional areas. Those areas are like points and little humps and little things that are going to help them to move from deep to shallow as they do that, and places they can stop off and feed and feel comfortable as they make that move. So it's going to be interesting to see. I'm definitely going to explore a little bit this week. We've got some good fishermen going out there. I think we're up to potentially 5 boats at this point. We have one boat that's kind of pending right now, a mechanical issue. Hopefully he'll get out there with us. And it'd be nice if we have 5. We can kind of communicate a bit, spread out. Hopefully the water conditions will be decent enough where we can move around some. There won't be too much trash, and we can do some running. And I've had some good times on Nolan, and hopefully we'll be able to figure out a little something. If it's not too muddy, I'll definitely, based on what we did last year, I may end up with a shad wrap on. But we did really well that trip. I believe Nate and I were there with Jackson last year. I think we were catching them mainly on shad wraps and jigs, as I recall. Does that sound right, Nate?
Yes, sir. I was throwing a bitchy bug.
Yeah, we're throwing kind of small jigs, and then I think I was mostly cranking, wasn't I? I think I was doing the shad wrap game. And
yes, sir. You were pretty much exclusively shad wrap, and I was pretty much exclusively jig.
And
we were catching them either way around.
Yeah, we were both whacking them. So it was like two extremely different ways of fishing, and we were both, standing 15 feet apart in the boat, and we were both catching the heck out of them. So it was a whole lot of fun. That was one of the more fun trips in a while. Hopefully we'll be able to get out there and find some space to be where there's not a ton of people, and the conditions and things will smile on us, and we'll have a good day. So yeah, it should be fun. Hopefully these ideas are going to help, and you guys can have a jumping off point here as you go through this time period of the water transitioning and potentially some color in the water. I'll leave off here with the story of Mason Cherry's boat captain from a couple years ago, when he was asked about this certain set of conditions, and he said he's a very good fisherman. I know he was somewhat being sarcastic, but somewhat not. He was asked what to do in a certain set of conditions, and he said he would go bowling. So that wasn't so reassuring at the time. But then we ended up going out that day, and this was 2 years ago, almost exactly to this date, and caught some really nice fish over at Cedar Creek. So we made it work, and we were doing a similar kind of techniques to this, and finding fish that were transitioning and pushing up into that shallower water and wanted to get up in there. And the fish that we caught that day, I recall, was really, really pale, like it had just moved out of deeper water. And you'll see that a lot this time of year. You'll catch these really white-looking bass that have been deeper, and they're just moving up in that shallow water. And it can be real exciting. They're hungry. They're getting spring fever. They're fired up. They're getting up there and enjoying being up a little shallower again, and the water temperatures coming up. And the one thing I want to mention too, while we're talking about muddy water particularly, and the fact that the next couple of days are going to be quite sunny. Muddy water warms up quicker than clear water, and that's the other thing to keep in mind. You can get up in some quite shallow water. I was watching a video the other day, a fellow made down in Alabama several weeks ago. It was right after that really cold snap that we had. And he was catching fish in literally 2 feet deep water, like these really shallow flats. And And I would have never thought to fish there, honestly. Like, that would have been the last place in the lake that I would have thought to fish. And he was catching these really nice, chunky females that were moving up into this shallow flat. And the idea was that it was a bit muddy, and the deeper water was still cold, and this nice shallow flat had warmed up a bit. You know, there was some weed growth there. This was, I think, down in Gunnersville. Some weed growth and some little bit stained water, muddy water. And they were up there hanging out and sunning themselves on that shallow flat. So that's something that is also a bit of a misconception. People think this, you know, it's winter or whatever, they must be really deep. And that's not necessarily always true. You know, I think even last week at Cumberland when we were there, I saw some posts after the fact. Somebody was there the day before we were there. He caught like 16 bass, and they were all in about 4-foot deep water, way back in the back of some of those creeks. And they were mostly largemouth. I think he caught 15 largemouth and 1 smallmouth, according to his report. And but he was literally in 4 feet of water, way back in the back of some places. And that's also something I didn't really check when I was there last week, and I wished I had. There was somebody else. Yeah, go ahead.
I had gone back there quite a bit and checked that because I figured there might be a largemouth bite going on doing that, but we weren't able to even find that many fish back there.
Yeah.
I don't know what part of the lake he was on.
I don't know. You know, it can. We've had some situations like that in some events at Cumberland. I remember a couple years ago, there were some guys that did really well in an event. They were way back in the back of Beaver, I think. It was the same thing. They were throwing dark colored, like flipping baits or jigs, like, you know, muddy water at the way back of some creeks there. And that was something we didn't even occur to us to do. You know, they were like, well, these guys, I think, were from down in that area. And they said, well, we got our flipping sticks out and went and found some muddy water and we got to work, you know. That was basically what they said. And they just flipped shallow cover all day, and which is not something you necessarily think of when you think of Cumberland. At least I don't. And that's something I need to adjust my thinking too, you know, and try that more. But they were in a largemouth pattern, catching them way back in more muddy conditions and more trees and things in the cover in the back of some places. And and so if you know where to look and you're diligent about looking, you can find some little hidden patterns like that other people aren't finding. So the same day, though, I think that we were there last weekend, I saw another post of somebody, I think a high school angler, who said he was doing well on Main Lake Point. So maybe around the area, similar habitat to what Everett and I found towards the end there, on these shallower kind of cuts, and not the big, huge creek arms, but like the smaller cuts off the main lake that have more chunky rocks and that kind of stuff. And he was catching them on those kind of points. So there were several patterns, I think, that might have been going on last week that we, you know, had we gone a couple of days in a row, I'm sure we would have figured those out. But that's all part of this game, and going and spending some time out there and, you know, doing some research and finding out what other people had success on, and just trying to put together the pieces of the puzzle in your mind and see what's going to happen. So I'm excited to get out this weekend. I think we're going to have some good fun, and enough people who know what they're doing out there to hopefully get a few bites and help ourselves along the learning journey. So thank you guys so much for being involved in this conversation. Anybody else have any last minute things to add to the video before we close the video out?
No, sir.
All right. Well,
simple to use, but wacky rigs also catch fish. Even when it's like very lethargic, if you get a dark color for the water, they'll pretty good chance of getting fish. Usually something smaller, but if you catch enough of those, you can get the bigger fish in the area. Right, and that is a good point. Something like a wacky rig that's a little more subtle, but if it is shallow enough water and it's a dark enough color bait, yeah, you could certainly catch them on something like that. You know, it's a more subtle kind of a quiver to it, but it is displacing some water, and it is fairly sizable enough where they can certainly perceive it being there with their lateral line. So yeah, that's a good point, especially in ponds and things, right? If you're pond fishing right now, yeah, wacky rig or, you know, weightless singo kind of thing is pretty much always a deal, and that could be something we can work into the video for some of these newer guys for next week. So be thinking about for next week what you might say to more beginning anglers. We'll brainstorm about that, bring in a few baits and rods and things, and then you guys can contribute as well. So thanks very much. Glad you were watching the video. We hope you guys have a great day, and we hope you catch them this spring.